Number of weeks ago, I reviewed the R36S, which I had a lot of really great things to say about it, especially due to its form factor, its screen, its battery life, and just its general ability to emulate games. However, this video is a bit of a follow-up video as there's been a lot more testing that I've done since I've purchased it, and I've kind of dialed down what games emulate best, what systems emulate best on this device, and what doesn't run so well at all when using this device. And I feel like this will be helpful for some people who are in the market to grab this very affordable retro emulation device. So let's take a look. Using the R36S, in a lot of ways, this device really operates quite similarly to my Raspberry Pi based iconic arcade machine. What I mean by that is a lot of the things that emulate well on that device also appear to emulate as well on the R36S, with a couple exceptions. So kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it, if you actually look at the R36S, anything that's 2D based, so basically Neo Geo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, all that era of gaming appears to run incredibly well on this device, and I have yet to find any issues with emulating those types of games. Now, moving though into other different arcade emulation stations like MAME, for example, you get a bit of a mixed bag. And what I mean by that is, this is where those exceptions that I'm talking about seem to linger. And it's not even in the performance of the games. It just appears that for some reason, the games that I can't run on my R36S appear to run on my iconic arcade machine, and the ones that appear to not run on my iconic arcade machine, some of them, however, seem to run on the R36S. I'm not sure if this is a hardware or performance-based issue, or if this is just the way these devices emulate. Now keep in mind, they are running different emulation systems, so that could be the case. Now, moving forward, however, into more 3D based emulation device or emulation systems, this is where we start to see basically a lot of the similar results that you get on the iconic arcade machine. What I mean is, when it comes to emulating PS1, this device appears to emulate every single thing that I've thrown at it from the PS1 library very well. I've had almost next to no issues with slowdown. I've had no problems with the way the games perform, no random crashes. They all appear to work incredibly well. However, like I said in my initial review of the R36S, I've done a lot more testing with N64. I've also played with some of the rendering settings. And for all intents and purposes, N64 runs even worse on the R36S. And I'm aware that N64 is typically harder to emulate on that style of device, or just on most devices generally, but it appears to run substantially worse in many cases on this device than even my Raspberry Pi based iconic arcade machine. Now, looking at different devices though, like Dreamcast, for example, the R36S almost has one-to-one results with my Raspberry based iconic arcade machine. What I mean by that is, if anyone's watched that video as well, and for those who haven't, it ran like 90% of the Dreamcast library incredibly well, and that appears to be the same case for the R36S. The only outlier that I've come across so far, and keep in mind I've actually tested more Dreamcast games on this device than even my iconic arcade machine, the only outlier appears to be Dead or Alive 2. For some reason, that game does not emulate well. I'm going to wager it has to do with the style of engine that was used, but it just doesn't appear to run in a stable fashion. It either goes incredibly slow and then you get spurts of it running around the 15 frames per second mark, or it just runs really slow. It just doesn't run well. So ultimately, the Dreamcast, I would argue, you get a lot of value out of it, runs incredibly well on this device. Now, another console that I tried as well was PSP. And I was surprised to also find that about 50% of the PSP games that I tried on the R36S appeared to run well. Silent Hill Origins was pretty terrible. It barely ran. I think I barely got like 10 frames per second on it. It was not, in my opinion, playable. However, I tried Assassin's Creed, and that did run quite well. The only finicky thing that you really had to watch out for was trying to ensure that your controls matched up and everything worked with the interface of the R36S or the controls of the R36S. But otherwise, you get a bit of a mixed bag. Now, some games run, some games don't. Something to keep in mind, but it's cool to know that some of that library is available to people who are using that device. And overall, I also tried Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced. I tried PC Engine-based games or TurboGrafx-based games. All of these ran near flawlessly. Looking at CPS2, so Capcom's arcade systems or arcade games, those actually all ran near flawless. Every single one that I tried. Even their CPS3 based games also ran near flawless. I had no issues with emulating any of those games, which was pretty awesome. So to keep this pretty simple, anything that's 2D based appears to run incredibly well. I've had zero issues on the R36S. 3D games, you get a bit of a mixed bag, but I would attribute this to the way these emulators are running these games and the way those games were designed for that era. So N64 I know has had challenges being properly emulated on other devices, whereas Dreamcast, PS1, those appear to run near flawlessly on a device like the R36S, which is really cool to see. So ultimately, if you're looking at getting this as an all-in-one retro device, you may have to make some concessions when it comes to the 3D era of gaming. However, if you're looking at this for retro 2D games or 2D arcade games, this device, for the most part, appears to run everything near perfectly and is a great addition to any retro collector or retro enthusiast who wants to use or play their retro collection on the go.